The biggest victory here in our state on election night was when Jim Himes unseated longtime Congressman Chris Shays in the 4th District. I had the chance to sit down this week with the Congressman-elect to talk about his win and what's next. First of all, Congressman-elect, congratulations.
Thank you, Dennis.
Last time you were on this program, you were a candidate.
That's right.
When did you know you were going to win?
You know, nobody knew. I didn't know until Congressman Shays called me to concede. I didn't have good numbers in front of me. I was watching it on TV, and so he called to concede, and that's when we knew. You
didn't have any internal polls that said this was going to happen?
We hadn't had polling done for probably 3 weeks prior to the election, so no. We knew it was going to be very, very close, but we did not know what the outcome was going to be.
What was that phone call like?
Well, you know, it was, you know, think about it. Both of us had no sleep for several days, and it's a, you know, really heightened environment. And, you know, obviously, you know, Congressman Shays served a long time. He served with distinction, and I don't know that he expected the outcome to be what it was. So I think he was a little shaken, but he was gracious, as he always is, and, you know, that was that.
What's the transition been like? Has he been helping you?
Yeah, we've been talking periodically. You know, he obviously has a lot of knowledge. His staff has a lot of knowledge, so we've been in contact with him and with his staff from time to time, and I've bumped into him. We were at an amazing funeral for a Norwalk sergeant who was lost over Hungary in World War II. His buddies did not stop looking for him for 60 years. They found him. He was buried at Arlington 3 weeks ago, and we were both at that. It was an amazingly moving event. What
kind of things have surprised you about becoming a congressman that you've been learning in the last couple of weeks?
Well, it's certainly surprising the amount that you have to do in a relatively limited amount of time. You get elected in early November, you get sworn in barely 2 months later, and in that time you've got to hire a staff, you've got to come up to speed on the issues, you've got to familiarize yourself not just with the legislation that may come up, but with what the legislative process is in Congress, because it's pretty complicated.
This is not an easy time to be, you know, sworn in as a lawmaker. The country's in an economic crisis. What are some of the first things you're going to do after you're sworn in to help get the country back going again?
That's right. It's not an easy time. It's a challenging time. The problems we face are as severe as any that we've probably faced in decades. And the answer to your question is easy, because the economy has got to be what we all focus on for the first couple of months. You saw the job reports last week. Another 500,000 Americans out of work. I don't care what we do for the financial services industry, how much money we put into the banks, until American households aren't worrying about losing their jobs, until they're not worrying about their houses continuing to decline in value, banks aren't going to lend. The economy is going to be sluggish. I think we're going to see that over this holiday period. So it has got to be about a stimulus plan that is going to turn the corner on the recession and get the economy growing again.
And what would you like to see in that stimulus plan?
Yeah, well, that's the question. I mean, how big and what's in there? And, you know, I think the consensus is that it needs to be big, and that's a good thing in the short term, and it's not a good thing because that's just debt that we're adding to our books, and we're going to have to pay that back. But what I'd like to see in it, first, we are going to do a lot of infrastructure, kill 2 birds with 1 stone. You know, we know what bad shape our railways and our bridges and our highways are in, so we're going to put people to work rebuilding that infrastructure. I hope it's forward-looking. I hope it's about mass transit. I hope it's about green and smart growth, as opposed to, you know, just widening highways and sort of taking us back to where we've been. That's important. We're also going to need to do a lot of direct aid to states and cities. You know, I was with the mayor of Bridgeport today. That city is facing a $20 million budget deficit. The state is facing a huge deficit. The federal government's going to need to step in and help out.
What do you think President Obama is going to do for the cities as president? I mean, you know, there's been a lot of criticism that Republicans haven't done enough for the cities, particularly in our state. What do you think?
Well, you know, as a former community organizer, President-elect Obama really gets it, and I'm excited about that. You know, as you know, I spent years working on how you rebuild distressed communities in our inner cities through affordable housing and better education, that sort of thing. He has already talked about things like doing 20 Harlem Children's Zones nationwide. The Harlem Children's Zone is an amazing experiment where they took 16 square blocks and focused on housing, on education, on safety, on health, and they're showing spectacular results. The President-elect wants to do 20 of those around the country. I hope one of them is right here in Connecticut, right here. I'd love to see it be in Bridgeport. And then, you know, we're going to see, I think, a real focus on jobs in the cities, because, you know, we can talk about every kind of government program you want to talk about. Until we have jobs in the cities, what are our kids going to do? Once they graduate school, where are they going to go to work? So I think he's going to focus on the kinds of things that will generate activity in our cities.
You had said in this program you wanted to be part of the Transportation Committee. Where does that stand?
I have requested a seat on the Transportation Committee, as I said I would. I've also requested a seat on the Financial Services Committee. If you think about my district, financial services, which by the way also includes affordable housing, much of the federal government's work in affordable housing goes through that committee. And then transportation, and I don't need to tell you why that's so important. These are the committees where I think I'll be in the best position to address the challenges that the district has.
You know, we talked earlier about how Fairfield County, if you make $250,000, it doesn't really go that far as it may go in other parts of the country. If President Obama goes ahead with this plan to to raise taxes for people who make that figure or more, would you fight that?
Well, you know, in this kind of an environment, in a recession, you don't raise taxes on anybody, and that will be my position in Congress as long as we are in the kind of trouble we are. The challenge we're in right now is to make sure that it doesn't get worse, that we don't find ourselves in a 1930s type situation. If we talk about raising taxes at all, that's where we could be heading. If we talk about restricting trade, just as we did in 1929, that's where we could be heading. So look, we're going to have a very hard conversation once we're through this recession, because we're going to spend a ton of money on this stimulus, which we need to do, but then we're going to owe it. And that's when we have a tough conversation about, you know, whatever it's going to be, that huge debt that we're carrying, how and when do we begin to pay it down? And that's when the tough choices around taxes start to hit us.
Because of these bailouts and these loans and all the public attention on what people are making, do you think we've seen the end of these big bonuses for people on Wall Street and gigantic salaries for some CEOs?
I hope so. You know, I mean, what we've learned from this is that the compensation structure on Wall Street and throughout corporate America was screwed up. You know, it's not just Wall Street, right? I mean, look at what the automaker CEOs made in the last couple of years as they watched their businesses circle the drain. I'm not sure that this is a place for government to step in. In fact, I'm pretty sure it's not a place for government to step in and say, here's how you have to do your compensation. But as long as our money is there, we have a vote on that. And look, shareholders need to step up and say, we're going to reward our CEOs not for what they did this year or this quarter, but for the value that they deliver over many years, long-term sustainable value. Let's pay our people well if they do well in the long term, but not if they set us up for the kind of catastrophe that we're in right now.
Let's go back to talk about your victory a little bit here. Now, you were a bit of a celebrity after you knocked off the only Republican congressman in New England. He'd been here for more than 20 years. What kind of calls did you get from various people?
Well, there were a lot of calls. Probably the most exciting was from the president-elect, and I was taking a lot of calls that day, and so Chicago lit up on my cell phone. I'm thinking, who do I know in Chicago? And but through great good fortune, well, it was his aide saying that he wanted to talk to me, and yeah, we had a nice chat. That was terrific. And you know, the other thing that's happening out there that makes me feel really good is I spent a week in D.C. for new member orientation, and Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House, and the leadership in the House are making some real efforts to set the partisanship aside. Let me give you an example. The Speaker holds a dinner traditionally every 2 years for the freshmen, and historically it's been the freshmen of his party generally. This time the Speaker invited the freshmen from the Democratic and the Republican Party, and invited John Boehner, the minority leader. And so symbolic, yes, but I think it indicates that the leadership in Congress is saying the American people will not tolerate partisanship. They are demanding solutions, and that was a really kind of nice tone to have been set so early.
So because of the significance of your victory, are you sort of like the hot freshman of the class? I mean, making news all over the country?
I don't know if I'm the hot freshman in the class, but no, you know, what's really gratifying is that there are a group of really idealistic but also practical people who feel the way I do, which is that if we don't start putting solutions on the table, we're going to hear about it from our constituents, and there will be hell to pay 2 years from now. So I think you've got a very a pragmatic group of action-oriented people going to Washington.
Your seat has been Republican for a long time. You pretty much have to turn around and start running again for 2010 in just a couple of months. What's the schedule of events? What do you have to start doing right after you get sworn in?
Yeah, it's the nature of Congress, right? Every 2 years. And look, I don't feel that bad about that, because I believe this, which is that if I can be a good congressman, if I can deliver for my district, if I can be in there helping think through how to turn this economy around, if I can do that, the re-election will take care of itself. My challenge now is to show my constituency, and I'm new to them and they're new to me, that I can deliver for them and that I'm going to represent them well, and if I do that well, I have every confidence they'll vote for me in 2 years.
What do you see as your political goals down the road? You want to be a congressman for 20 years? Or you going to be a senator someday?
You know, I got into this because the country was in such trouble, and it's a really good question. You know, if the country was all of a sudden on an even keel, and everything was going very well, I don't know what I would do. I'd have to think that through at the time. But right now, it's an important time to get some folks into D.C. who are going to bring solutions to the table, who are going to focus on the economy. You know, I spent most of my career in the private sector, so I've got a thing or two to say about how we build a thriving economy. And look, let's get through that, and then I'll worry about what comes next down the road. You know, it's not about my career. This is about, you know, again, that jobs report, 500,000 Americans out of work. We're now up to about 2 million Americans unemployed. Every minute of every day, anybody in my position had better be thinking about that.
Good enough. Congressman-elect Jim Himes.
Dennis, thank you very much.
Nice to see you again.
Yeah, good to see you.